In 1930, an entire class of 50 indigenous students vanished from an Arizona boarding school without a trace, their disappearance buried in forgotten case files and silence. But over 4 decades later, a newly elected sheriff discovers a shocking detail, something everyone before had overlooked, a crucial piece of evidence that would finally solve the 45-year-old mystery. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Red Harvest, Arizona, a remote town nestled near the Arizona-New Mexico border that seemed forgotten by time itself. In 1975, the town bore the scars of its troubled past. Once home to a federal Indian boarding school in the early 1900s, it had begun its decline in the 1950s, the 1930s, when racial segregation intensified, leaving behind a tense, decaying place riddled with high crime, economic hardship, and wounds that refused to heal. Sheriff Walter Claiborne, 48 years old and recently elected, stood in an alley that reeked of decay and desperation. 2 small bodies lay crumpled against the brick wall, their dark hair matted with blood. Indigenous children, no more than 12 or 13 years old. Walter crouched beside them, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he examined the scene. He noticed defensive wounds on their small hands, signs they had fought back against their attacker. As he photographed the crime scene with the department's old camera, Walter's mind churned with the bitter reality of Red Harvest. The hate and racial tension between whites and indigenous people had reached a boiling point since most boarding schools were shutting down. Crimes were skyrocketing, indigenous homelessness plagued the streets, and chaos hung thick in the air like desert dust. Walter marked the positions of evidence with chalk, his stomach turning as he catalogued each brutal detail. The sight of these innocent children, discarded like refuse in this forgotten alley, overwhelmed him. How many more had died like this? How many families were mourning children who would never come home? "I can't," he muttered to Deputy Martinez, who was securing the perimeter. "I need a moment." Martinez nodded understandingly. "Take your time, Sheriff. We've got this." Walter stumbled to his patrol car, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The drive back to the sheriff's station felt endless, each red light giving him more time to see those children's faces behind his closed eyelids. The sheriff's building stood like a weathered sentinel on Main Street, its adobe walls cracked but sturdy. Walter pushed through the heavy wooden doors and made his way to his office, collapsing into his chair. Deputy Carl Peterson, a veteran officer with graying temples, knocked and entered. "Rough scene out there, huh?" He set a cup of coffee on Walter's desk. "You shouldn't think too much about it, Walt. You'll get used to it eventually. We all do." Walter wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "I hope I never get used to seeing dead kids, Carl, but I do hope I get stronger. Something has to be done to stop this. Every day, another indigenous child ends up dead. This town's looking more and more like hell." Peterson shrugged, his expression hardening. "This'll only stop once all those Indians learn to live a civilized life like us." He turned and left, leaving Walter alone with his disgust. Walter couldn't believe that even his fellow officers were clouded by such prejudice. He sat in silence, letting the coffee's warmth seep into his bones. After gathering his strength, he stood and walked down the narrow hallway to the archive room. The archive room smelled of old paper and dust. Metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with cardboard boxes and manila folders. Walter began pulling files on cases involving indigenous victims, searching for patterns, similarities, anything that might help identify who was behind these murders. Hours passed. Files and archive boxes littered the floor around him. His eyes burned from reading faded type and handwritten notes. Then, in the back corner of the room, he noticed a small door marked pre-1940 storage. Curious about older patterns of violence, he tried the handle. It was locked, but the wood around the latch was rotted. A firm push and it gave way. Inside, cobwebs draped over boxes that hadn't been touched in decades. Walter pulled a particularly dusty box from the top shelf, coughing as particles filled the air. The label, barely legible, read 1930, Missing Persons, Federal Investigation. Walter carried the box back to better light and opened it carefully. Inside were case files documenting the disappearance of an entire class of 50 Indigenous children from the local boarding school. They had simply vanished from all records in 1930. Walter remembered this case. Everyone in Red Harvest knew about it, though most preferred to keep quiet. His own grandfather had been the investigating officer. Walter had seen many terrible things, but this case had always shocked and baffled him. An entire class couldn't just vanish. Something deeper, darker must have happened. He gathered the files and returned to his office, spreading them across his desk. As he studied the documents, a black and white photograph caught his eye. It showed the missing class posed in front of the school, children in uniform rows, their faces solemn. But in the background, partially visible, was a moving truck. Walter squinted, making out the lettering on its side. S.H. Stiles Moving Company. His pulse quickened. That company still operated in Red Harvest. He'd seen their trucks around town just this week. Deputy Miguel Herrera walked past the open door, then doubled back. "What are you doing with that old case?" Walter looked up. "After today's crime scene, I needed to understand the history. This case from 1930, 50 Indigenous children vanishing. It connects somehow. I feel it in my bones." "These people have suffered for so long, Miguel. Someone needs to care." Herrera shook his head. "It's useless and hopeless picking up such an old case, Walter. Focus on current cases." He paused, then added, "Oh, and don't forget your appointment with Mayor Krantz. Not sure what it's about, but probably something regarding the upcoming election." Walter glanced at his watch. "Damn, I almost forgot. Thanks, Miguel." He secured the case files in his desk drawer, locking it carefully. The photograph with the moving truck lingered in his mind as he stood and straightened his uniform. Something about that company name nagged at him. He grabbed his hat and headed for the door, his footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. The late afternoon heat hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. City Hall stood just next door, its Spanish colonial architecture a reminder of the town's layered history. Walter walked across the scorched courtyard, his mind still turning over the day's discoveries. 50 children couldn't just disappear, and that moving truck in the photograph, it meant something. He was certain of it. As he approached the mayor's office, Walter squared his shoulders. Whatever Mayor Krantz wanted, he would handle it professionally. But his thoughts remained with those 2 dead children in the alley and the 50 who had vanished 45 years ago. As he reached for the handle, Walter froze outside Mayor Krantz's office, catching the sound of voices from within. In his rush, he'd forgotten to knock. Through the thick oak door, he could hear the mayor's unmistakable booming voice. "Excellent work as always," Mayor Krantz was saying. "This new contract will benefit both the town and your company. Your consistent service and quality over the years speaks for itself." "The pleasure is ours, Mayor," came another voice, smooth and cultured. "And we're grateful for S.H. Stiles Moving Company's opportunity to support you in the coming election. Your vision for Red Harvest aligns perfectly with our business interests." Walter froze. S.H. Stiles Moving Company. The name hit him like a physical blow. The same company from the 1930 photograph, the truck in the background when 50 children vanished. His hand remained suspended over the door handle as his mind raced. After 45 years, the company was still operating, still connected to town leadership. The door suddenly opened, and Walter found himself face to face with a well-dressed man in his 50s. Behind him, Mayor Krantz looked up from his mahogany desk. "Sheriff Claiborne!" the mayor exclaimed. "We didn't hear you knock." Walter cleared his throat. "My apologies, Mayor Krantz. I didn't mean to interrupt." The well-dressed man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No harm done. We were just wrapping up." Mayor Krantz stood, gesturing between them. "Sheriff, meet Simon H. Stiles, Jr., owner of S.H. Stiles Moving Company. They're one of our most important business partners in town." Walter shook the man's hand, noting the expensive gold watch and manicured nails. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Stiles." "Likewise, Sheriff. I've heard good things about your recent election." Stiles turned to the mayor. "I'll let you gentlemen talk. Douglas, I'll see you at the club Thursday?" "Wouldn't miss it, Simon." Mayor Krantz walked Stiles out, their footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Walter stood in the opulent office, studying the oil paintings of previous mayors. His eyes lingered on one from the 1930s, Franklin W. Krantz, the current mayor's grandfather. When Mayor Krantz returned, he closed the door firmly and gestured to a leather chair. "Sit, Walter. We need to discuss the upcoming election." Walter sat, his mind still processing the connection to S.H. Stiles. The mayor leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I need things to run smoothly and securely, especially with these rising criminal cases from the indigenous population. Today's murders, for instance. Voters are concerned, Walter. They want action." "We're investigating thoroughly." "Investigation isn't enough," Krantz interrupted. "To ensure my success, I need to prove there will be lower crime rates involving the indigenous community this month. I have a solution." Walter waited, his unease growing. "Relocation," the mayor said simply. "S.H. Stiles Moving Company will help us achieve this goal. We need your department's support to ensure the operation goes smoothly. I want you to develop a plan to anticipate any trouble and make this possible." Walter leaned back, choosing his words carefully. "Are you talking about an exodus of the indigenous community from Red Harvest?" "Exactly." The mayor's smile was cold. "We've arranged everything with S.H. Stiles. They'll be relocated to a place they deserve, somewhere better where they can live peacefully without causing trouble in our town." "Which settlement?" Walter pressed. "Where exactly are they being moved?" The mayor waved dismissively. "Those details aren't your concern. Your job is to ensure law and order during the transition. Can I count on you, Sheriff?" Walter felt trapped. Refusing would mean losing his position, any chance to protect these people. But agreeing felt like betrayal. "I'll need to review the legal framework." "The framework is solid." Krantz's tone brooked no argument. "This is for everyone's benefit. Lower crime, better living conditions for them, peace for our citizens. Win-win." The mayor stood, signaling the meeting's end. "Keep this confidential, Walter. But I want to see real results. I'll expect your plan update by week's end." Walter rose slowly. "Understood, Mayor." "Good man. I knew I could count on you." Walter left the office, his thoughts churning. The S.H. Stiles Moving Company, connected to the 1930 disappearances and now to this new relocation. The mayor's grandfather had been in office when those 50 children vanished. Now his grandson was planning another removal. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Walter crossed the courtyard back to the sheriff's station. His grandfather's words echoed in his memory. "Sometimes the real criminals wear suits and shake your hand." He pushed through the station doors, his resolve hardening. Whatever was planned, he would uncover the truth. Those 2 dead children deserved justice. The 50 who vanished deserved answers. And he'd be damned if he'd let history repeat itself on his watch. Deputy Herrera was waiting in Walter's office when he returned, case files spread across the desk. The younger man looked exhausted, his usually crisp uniform wrinkled from the long day. "Just finished interviewing the suspect in the children's murders," Herrera said without preamble. "Thought you'd want an update." Walter sank into his chair. "How did it go?" "We found a 15-year-old Diné boy," Herrera began, consulting his notes. "Name's Thomas Begay. Had blood on his hands, his fingerprints all over a knife we believe was the murder weapon." 15, Walter repeated, his heart sinking. Just a child himself. "That's not the troubling part." Herrera flipped a page. The boy was in shock, speaking incoherently, kept rambling about a very hot place with red doors, like a barn, but quiet and underground. We pressed him for a location, but he couldn't or wouldn't say. Seemed troubled, delirious even. Walter straightened. Did he seem traumatized? Could he be a victim too? Herrera shrugged, but Walter caught the uncertainty in his eyes. Could be, but it's not looking good for him. His prints were everywhere, and no one saw anyone else near the scene. These people rarely harm their own, Walter insisted, especially not children killing children. There has to be another person involved. Probably, Herrera admitted. But you know how it is. These cases happen multiple times a week now. The higher-ups want them closed quickly. They'll likely pin it all on the boy for convenience. The words hung heavy in the air. Walter felt a familiar sadness wash over him. Justice in Red Harvest was often about expedience, not truth. "Where's the boy now?" Walter asked. "Secured in cell 3, listed as a suspect." "I'd like to talk with him." Herrera shook his head. "Give it some time, Walter. We just finished the interview, and he's still badly shaken. I don't think he'll say anything coherent right now." Glancing at the wall clock, Herrera stood. "It's almost evening. Our shift's ending. We should head home." "I'll stay a bit longer," Walter said. "Can I see the interrogation report?" Herrera handed him a manila folder. "Don't stay too late. This case will still be here tomorrow." After Herrera left, Walter spread the interrogation report alongside the 1930 case files. The crime scene photos of the two girls were brutal, but he forced himself to study them objectively. The boy's statement was indeed fragmented, full of references to heat, darkness, and those mysterious red doors. Then he turned to the 1930 files. What he found made his blood run cold. There had been an investigation. Of the 50 missing students, 3 had been found. The official record stated they'd been relocated, but victim statements were attached. 2 of the 3 survivors described being held in a very hot and dark room. Walter's hand trembled as he wrote a note connecting the testimonies. The similarity to Thomas Begay's rambling was too precise to be coincidence. Digging deeper into the boarding school records, he discovered something else. The school had maintained a close partnership with S.H. Stiles Moving Company. Every field trip, every outing, every transportation need had been handled by them. This struck Walter as odd. Why would a moving company, not a bus service, handle school transportation? He pulled out the class photograph again. The children stood in neat rows, faces solemn, dressed in their boarding school uniforms. The caption read, "Annual Field Trip, May 1930. But instead of a school bus in the background, there was that moving truck. Why would children be loaded into a moving truck for a field trip? Walter continued searching through the records. There was no mention of any other transportation company ever being used by the school. S.H. Stiles had held a complete monopoly. A thought struck him. What other assets did the company own? Did they have buses? Other vehicles? Properties? He reached for the phone and dialed a familiar number. After 4 rings, a tired voice answered. "County Recorder's Office. Rebecca speaking." "Rebecca, it's Walter Claiborne. I'm sorry for calling after hours." "Walter?" Her voice warmed. "What are you doing working so late?" "I need a favor, Becca. It's important." She sighed. "You always say that." "This time it's different. I need to look up properties owned by S.H. Stiles Moving Company. Physical records, deeds, titles, ownership transfers, building permits, everything you have." "Walter, you know I can't just hand over records without proper paperwork, especially at this hour." "It's related to today's murders," he pressed. "Those 2 Indigenous girls. I think there's a connection to something bigger, Becca. Something that goes back decades." There was a long pause. Rebecca had been his friend since high school. She knew him well enough to hear the urgency in his voice. "Fine," she said finally. but just this once. The office is closing now, but come by tomorrow morning. I'll have the records ready." "Thank you, Becca. I owe you—" "You owe me dinner at that new steakhouse," she corrected, "and an explanation." "Deal?" After hanging up, Walter slumped in his chair. His eyes burned from reading, and exhaustion weighed on his shoulders like a physical burden. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was still frustratingly incomplete. S.H. Stiles Moving Company, the 1930 disappearances, the mayor's relocation plan and the partnership with the same company, Thomas B. Gay's fevered words about red doors and underground heat, 2 dead girls in an alley. It all connected somehow. He was certain of it. Walter locked the case files in his desk drawer and stood, his joints protesting. Tomorrow he would dig deeper. Tonight he needed rest to think clearly. As he switched off the office lights, one last thought nagged at him. The boy's description of red doors and underground heat matched testimonies from 45 years ago. What kind of place had remained unchanged for so long, and what horrors had it witnessed in all those years? The evening darkness had settled over Red Harvest like a heavy blanket as Walter drove through the quiet streets toward home. His headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating abandoned storefronts and empty sidewalks. The town always felt different after dark, more menacing, as if the shadows hid secrets too terrible to face in daylight. A figure darted across the street ahead, caught briefly in his headlights. Walter slammed on the brakes, his tires squealing. An Indigenous boy, maybe 14 or 15, was running frantically down the middle of the road. No shoes, his clothes torn and shabby, but it was the look of pure terror on his face that made Walter's blood run cold. Walter pulled over and jumped out. "Hey," he called. "Son, wait. Are you okay? Do you need help?" The boy glanced back, his eyes wide with fear, but didn't stop. If anything, he ran faster, his bare feet slapping against the pavement. Walter gave chase, his longer strides slowly closing the distance. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm the sheriff. I can help." But the boy remained terrified, weaving between parked cars, trying desperately to escape. Walter was about to catch up when 2 men emerged from an alley, moving with practiced efficiency. They grabbed the boy, one wrapping thick arms around his thin frame, while the other quickly bound his wrists with rope. The boy struggled wildly, crying out in a language Walter didn't understand, but the fear needed no translation. "What's going on here?" Walter demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. The larger man, broad-shouldered with a scarred face, looked at Walter with annoyance. "Didn't the mayor or your boss tell you we're cleaning the streets of these mongrels?" The casual cruelty of the word made Walter flinch. The mayor had mentioned relocation, but Walter hadn't expected it to begin so soon, or in such a brutal manner. "I need to see your paperwork," Walter said firmly. The second man, younger with cold eyes, spat on the ground. "You're on the wrong side here, Sheriff. If you want to be concerned with helping us catch these children. We were told to gather them for transport." They began walking toward a truck parked nearby, dragging the bound boy between them. Walter's heart sank as he recognized the logo on the vehicle's side. S.H. Stiles Moving Company. "The paperwork," Walter repeated, following them. With an exaggerated sigh, the scarred man pulled folded documents from his jacket. Walter examined them under a street light. Everything appeared legitimate. Mayor Krantz's signature, the S.H. Stiles management approval, even Simon H. Stiles, Jr. S. personal authorization. As they reached the truck, the men opened the back doors. Walter gasped. Inside, huddled together like frightened animals, were at least 20 Indigenous children. Their ages ranged from perhaps 8 to 16, all with the same terrified expressions. Walter's mind raced. If he tried to stop this, he'd be going against direct orders from the mayor. He'd lose his badge, any chance to investigate further. But watching these children being loaded like cargo made his stomach turn. "This is the last one," the younger man said, shoving the new boy into the truck. "Now we deliver them." "Deliver them where?" Walter asked. "There's housing prepared," the scarred man replied. "They'll stay there temporarily until the permanent settlement is ready." Walter made a decision. "I'll escort you." The men exchanged glances, but couldn't refuse a sheriff's escort. Walter returned to his patrol car and followed the truck as it rumbled out of town. The journey took them deep into rural Arizona, following roads that grew progressively narrower and more isolated. Walter watched his odometer, noting they were heading northeast, away from any established settlements he knew of. The desert stretched endlessly on either side, broken only by scrub brush and the occasional Joshua tree. After nearly 2 hours of silent pursuit, the truck's brake lights suddenly lit up. It veered off the main road and into a small settlement, dust swirling in their headlights. Walter parked and surveyed the area. Out of the darkness emerged a 2-story rectangular structure surrounded by buildings of similar construction. But this one stood out, enclosed by a chain-link fence crowned with barbed wire. A single gate offered entry, and the compound was drenched in the glare of harsh floodlights. It resembled a detention facility far more than temporary housing. "This doesn't look big enough for all these children," Walter observed as the men began unloading their human cargo. The scarred man shrugged. "Not our problem." "Who owns this place?" Walter pressed. S.H. Stiles? Some private institution? The government? "Look, Sheriff," the younger man said impatiently, "we don't know and we don't care. We're just following orders. Pick up the kids, bring them here. That's it." Walter watched as the children were herded out of the truck one by one. They moved slowly, stiff from the journey, fear evident in every hesitant step. Some of the younger ones were crying silently, tears streaming down their faces. A woman emerged from the building, heavyset with a severe expression. She carried a clipboard and began checking off names as the children filed past. 23, she announced when the last child had exited the truck, all accounted for. The men turned to Walter. "You should head back now, Sheriff. We don't need an escort anymore." Walter nodded slowly, his mind already working. Tomorrow he would meet with Rebecca, check property records. He would ask the mayor for more details about this operation. He made a mental note to have Rebecca look up this specific property as well. He waited, watching as the children were guided through the gate and handed off to another man waiting inside. The figure at the entrance accepted them without a word, ushering them quickly into the building's shadow. The boy who'd been running looked back once, his eyes meeting Walter's through the fence. The desperation in that gaze would haunt Walter for days. The gate clanged shut, the lock clicking into place with finality. The two men climbed back into their truck and started the engine. Walter returned to his patrol car, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Something was terribly wrong here. This didn't look like relocation. As he began the long drive back to Red Harvest, he watched in his rearview mirror as the S.H. Stiles truck turned in the opposite direction, heading deeper into the desert. Walter had only been driving a few miles when he spotted the flickering neon sign of a gas station, a beacon of civilization in the empty desert. Walter pulled into the lot, his head pounding with a vicious headache that had been building since he'd left the fenced housing. The events of the day, the murdered children, the old case files, the mayor's plans, and now this disturbing relocation pressed down on him like a physical weight. He needed food, coffee, and a moment to clear his head before the 2-hour drive back to Red Harvest. After filling his tank, Walter entered the small convenience store. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh after the darkness outside. "Evening, Sheriff," the clerk said, an older man with weathered hands and kind eyes. "Long way from home, aren't you?" "Just passing through," Walter replied, grabbing a pre-wrapped sandwich, a bag of chips, and a large coffee. He added a magazine about fishing, something to distract his mind during dinner. Back in his patrol car, Walter rolled down the windows, letting the cool desert air flow through. He unwrapped his sandwich and took a bite. The coffee was bitter and hours old, but the caffeine was what he needed. He was halfway through his meal when movement in his rearview mirror caught his attention. A figure was creeping through the shadows at the edge of the parking lot, moving with the cautious stealth of someone who didn't want to be seen. Walter set down his sandwich and stepped out of his car. As he moved closer, the figure resolved into the same Indigenous boy from earlier, the one who'd been running, who'd been caught and bound. His hands were free now, though rope burns marked his wrists. He was still barefoot, his feet bleeding from the rough terrain. Walter expected the boy to run again at the sight of him. Instead, the boy's face lit up with desperate hope. He ran toward Walter, not away. "You... good... police... help," the boy said in broken English, his voice hoarse. Without waiting for a response, he yanked open the patrol car's passenger door and jumped inside. "Wait, wait!" Walter hurried after him, sliding into the driver's seat. "What are you doing? How did you escape?" "Help? Friends. You drive," the boy pleaded, his dark eyes wide with urgency. "Why do you trust me?" Walter asked, bewildered. "You were running from me earlier." The boy studied him for a long moment, then said simply, "You... good. I know. Drive... ... Walter glanced around the empty parking lot. No one seemed to be pursuing the boy. The compound was just a turn away, and it was eerily quiet. Against his better judgment, he started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. The boy's stomach growled audibly. Walter handed him the rest of his sandwich and chips. The boy fell on the food like he hadn't eaten in days, devouring everything, including gulping down Walter's coffee. "See?" The boy suddenly pointed ahead. Walter followed his gesture and saw the S.H. Stiles truck returning to the compound. But something was wrong. He could see figures in the back, the same children who had just been unloaded. "They're loading them again?" Walter muttered, confused. The truck pulled away from the compound, heading in the different direction from Walter's position. The boy grabbed Walter's arm, pointing frantically at the departing vehicle. "Save! Friends! Follow! Please!" Walter hesitated. Every instinct told him to return to Red Harvest, to report what he'd seen. But looking at the boy, his desperation, his obvious escape skills, the fact that he'd somehow gotten free and found Walter, he knew the child would just end up on the streets again. "All right," Walter decided. "I'll follow them. Maybe they're moving to another housing facility." That place was too small for so many children. He maintained a safe distance behind the truck, headlights off, following the red taillights through the darkness. The road wound deeper into the wilderness, leaving any pretense of civilization far behind. Saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels in the moonlight, and the only sounds were the rumble of engines and the whisper of wind. Half an hour passed. The boy remained alert, eyes fixed on the truck ahead. Finally, the vehicle slowed and turned off the main road. Walter followed cautiously, seeing a large structure looming in the darkness. It was a warehouse, old and imposing, its metal sides rusted with age. A weathered sign near the entrance read, S.H. Stiles Moving Equipment Storage Facility. Walter parked at a distance, partially hidden behind a cluster of rocks. He turned to the boy, his heart heavy. "I didn't expect them to come here," he said slowly, trying to make the boy understand. "This is a warehouse, not housing. There's nothing I can do. I'm alone, out of radio range to call for backup." "Please help," the boy begged, tears forming in his eyes. "Tomorrow," Walter promised, "I'll go to the office and check this place. I'll get help." The boy shook his head frantically, but before he could speak, a figure emerged from the warehouse entrance. The man walked purposefully toward their car, having spotted them somehow, despite the distance. Walter stepped out to meet him, trying to project authority. The man was middle-aged, with the soft look of someone who spent more time with paperwork than physical labor. "Sheriff," the man said, seeming unsurprised. "I'm the warehouse manager. Didn't expect a police escort out here." His eyes moved to the patrol car, spotting the boy inside. A smile crossed his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, thank you for driving all this way to deliver that boy. We were wondering where he'd gotten to." Walter's options evaporated. He was miles from anywhere, alone, with no legal authority to intervene. Reluctantly, he opened the passenger door and helped the boy out. The child looked at him with betrayed eyes, then suddenly shouted, "Red door! Barn! Red door!" The manager's expression hardened. "The boy's an idiot, doesn't know what he's saying. Too much sun, probably." "I'll head back to town then," Walter said, trying to memorize every detail of the place. "Yes, you should," the manager agreed. "It's getting very late. If you have any questions, contact the mayor or come to our office in town." Walter watched as the manager took the boy's arm and began walking him across the road toward the warehouse. The boy stumbled, his bare feet struggling on the rough ground. Walter got into his car but didn't start the engine. Something was terribly wrong here. Every instinct screamed danger. His grandfather's intuition, passed down through generations of lawmen, was setting off every alarm. He watched through his windshield as the man and boy approached the warehouse. Suddenly, the boy twisted free and tried to run. The manager cursed and gave chase. Despite his soft appearance, he moved with surprising speed. The boy had barely made it 20 feet when the manager caught him. Without hesitation, the man struck the boy hard on the back of the head. The child crumpled to the ground. Walter's hand moved to his service weapon, but he forced himself to remain still. The manager hoisted the boy over his shoulder like a sack of grain and continued toward the warehouse. This was nothing like what Mayor Krantz had described. This wasn't relocation to a better place. This was something far more sinister. Walter rolled down his window, straining to hear as the manager disappeared inside with his unconscious burden. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind and distant coyotes. Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable. Children's voices, shrieking and shouting. The sounds of terror and pain drifting from somewhere deep within the warehouse. Walter's blood ran cold. Whatever was happening in that warehouse, children were suffering. The boy had been right to beg for help, and Walter had delivered him right back into danger. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He couldn't storm the warehouse alone. That would be suicide and would help no one. He needed a radio signal to call backup. He needed evidence. He needed to act, and fast, before more children disappeared forever, like those 50 from 1930. Walter started his engine and began the drive back, his mind racing with plans. The corruption ran deep, but not everyone in Red Harvest was part of it. He would find allies, and he would return. Walter pressed down on the accelerator, pushing his patrol car to its limits as he raced back toward the gas station. His hands trembled on the wheel, not from fear, but from rage. The same gas station's lights appeared like a beacon in the darkness. Walter skidded to a stop and rushed inside, startling the clerk who was half dozing behind the counter. "I need to use your phone," Walter said urgently. "Official business?" The clerk nodded, gesturing to the payphone on the wall. Walter grabbed the receiver and dialed Deputy Herrera's home number from memory. 1 ring. 2, 3, 4. "Hello?" Herrera's voice was thick with sleep. "Miguel, it's Walter. I'm sorry to wake you, but this can't wait." "Walter?" There was rustling, the sound of Herrera sitting up. "What time is it?" "Where are you?" "Listen carefully," Walter said, his words tumbling out. "The relocation the mayor talked about, I followed the trucks. They took those Indigenous children to a warehouse owned by S.H. Stiles, about 2.5 hours outside town. Miguel, I heard children screaming inside. I saw them knock a boy for trying to escape." "Jesus, Walter," Herrera breathed. "What you did was incredibly dangerous for your personal safety. You went alone?" "That's not the point." Walter gripped the phone tighter. "Something is terribly wrong in that warehouse. I have a gut feeling the mayor and the owner of S.H. Stiles are involved in something horrific. We need to intervene now." "Slow down," Herrera said, though Walter could hear the growing concern in his voice. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Walter took a deep breath. "They beat that boy outside the warehouse, in plain view. If they'll do that when someone's watching, imagine what they're doing inside where no one can see. We need to call a judge, get an urgent search warrant." There was a long pause. Walter could almost hear Herrera thinking, weighing the risks. "Miguel," Walter pressed, "you know me. I wouldn't do this, wouldn't wake you in the middle of the night, if it wasn't something real bad." "I know," Herrera said finally. "All right, I'll contact Judge Baines. He's got a good conscience, and he owes me a favor." "Tell him it's possibly connected to the old federal case from 1930, Walter added, "the missing Indigenous class, and to today's homicides." "That should get his attention," Herrera agreed. "Wait there, I'll call you back at that number." Walter hung up and began pacing the small store. The clerk watched him nervously, clearly sensing something serious was happening. Walter bought another coffee, more to have something to do with his hands than from any need for caffeine. Minutes crawled by. Walter checked his watch repeatedly. Every second that passed was another second those children were in danger. He thought of the boy who'd trusted him, who'd known somehow that Walter was good police. He'd failed that boy once. He wouldn't fail him again. The phone rang. The clerk answered and immediately handed it to Walter. "We got the green light," Herrera said without preamble. "Judge Baines signed the warrant. I'm assembling a tactical team as we speak. Peterson, Martinez, Kowalski, all good men who won't ask too many questions." "Thank God," Walter breathed. He gave Herrera the gas station's location. "We'll gather here before heading to the warehouse. It's about a half an hour from this point." "Walter?" Herrera's voice turned serious. "You better be right about this. Not that I wish there to be suffering children inside. God knows I don't. But if we're wrong, if this is just a legitimate storage facility—" "I know," Walter said quietly. "But I heard those screams, Miguel. I saw that boy get beaten and taken inside." "God help us if you're wrong," Herrera repeated. "But God help those children if you're right. We'll be there within the hour." The line went dead. Walter hung up and stepped outside into the cool desert night. The stars blazed overhead, indifferent to human suffering. But Walter Claiborne was not indifferent. He would see justice done, no matter the cost. He leaned against his patrol car and waited, watching the empty road for the first sign of approaching headlights. The convoy of police vehicles cut through the desert darkness like predators on the hunt. Walter led the way, his patrol car followed by 3 squad cars and a tactical van. No sirens, no lights. They moved in silence, hoping to maintain the element of surprise. Herrera rode with Walter, checking his service weapon and radio. "The team's ready," he said. 8 officers total, plus 4 tactical specialists. If there's resistance, we're prepared." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Walter replied, though his hand rested on his own weapon. The warehouse appeared ahead, a dark monolith against the star-studded sky. Walter signaled the convoy to stop at a distance. The officers emerged from their vehicles, moving with practiced efficiency. "Remember," Herrera whispered to the assembled team, "we have reports of children inside. Watch your fire. Be careful with your shots if it comes to that." They approached the warehouse on foot, spreading out to surround the building. In the harsh moonlight, Walter could see the structure clearly, decrepit, with red rusting metal siding that had seen better days. No identifying signs marked it as belonging to S.H. Stiles, just an anonymous building in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by desert scrub and bordered by a dry arroyo. The main doors burst open before they could announce themselves. Several men rushed out. The warehouse manager Walter had met earlier in the lead. "What's going on here?" the manager demanded, waving a sheaf of papers. "We have the mayor's signature. This is a legal operation." Herrera stepped forward, his badge gleaming. That doesn't matter now. We've received reports of children crying and shouting from this facility, as well as a witness report of violence against a minor." "This is harassment," the manager protested. "You have no right—" "We have a court order," Herrera interrupted, producing the warrant. "Stand aside." The manager's face went pale as he read the document. After a tense moment, he stepped back, allowing the officers to enter. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and poorly lit. The upper level appeared mostly empty, dusty boxes stacked haphazardly, broken shelving units, old moving dollies covered in rust and cobwebs. It looked like any abandoned storage facility. "Where are the children?" Walter demanded, confronting the manager. "I saw them brought here myself." The manager remained silent, his jaw clenched. His workers, 4 rough-looking men, stood nearby, exchanging nervous glances. Walter swept his eyes across the warehouse interior, searching for anything that felt out of place. Then he spotted it, an industrial-sized box buried beneath a stack of others. Unlike the rest, this one bore faded markings, and something had been crudely painted on the side facing the wall. Walter stepped closer, narrowing his eyes as he peered through the narrow crease between the box and the wall. A red barn door, roughly drawn, its simplicity somehow deeply unsettling. "Red door, barn," Walter whispered, remembering the boy's desperate words. He approached the box and knocked on it. The sound was wrong, not the hollow echo of cardboard, but the solid thud of wood. "It's not a box," he called to the team. "It's plywood, painted to look like the others." "Get them away from there!" the manager shouted, but 2 officers were already restraining him. The tactical team moved in, quickly clearing the boxes stacked on top of the false structure. As they pushed the plywood aside, a trap door was revealed in the concrete floor, secured with a heavy padlock. "Bolt cutters!" Herrera ordered. The lock gave way with a sharp crack. As they lifted the trapdoor, a wave of stale, fetid air rose from below, and with it came sounds, soft crying, whispers, the shuffle of many feet. Walter shone his flashlight down the narrow stairs. At the bottom, dozens of pairs of eyes stared up at them, children huddled together in the darkness. "Dear God," someone whispered. "Get them out!" Walter commanded, already descending the stairs. "Medical team, now!" The rescue operation began immediately. Officers formed a human chain, gently lifting children up the stairs and into the warehouse proper. Some of the children were too weak to walk, others too frightened to move. Walter and Herrera worked side by side, speaking soft reassurances as they carried the smallest ones. "How many?" Herrera asked as they brought up what seemed like the 30th child. "I count at least 30, an officer reported. "Maybe more." In the background, the warehouse workers were being arrested, their protests falling on deaf ears. The manager had stopped talking entirely, his face ashen as he watched the children emerge. "This is going to be big news," Herrera said quietly to Walter as they paused between trips. "The mayor's reputation will be destroyed." Walter wiped sweat from his brow. "I know people mostly don't care what happens to Indigenous kids, but I believe not everyone turns a blind eye. Some people still have consciences." "Let's hope so," Herrera agreed. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, we need backup, forensics, and multiple medical units at our location. We have approximately 30 minors requiring immediate medical attention." After all the children had been brought up, Officer Martinez called from below. "Sheriff, Deputy, you need to see this. It's bigger than we thought down here." Walter and Herrera descended again, weapons drawn this time. The underground space opened into a network of rooms carved from the earth and reinforced with concrete. Their flashlights revealed a nightmare: makeshift cells with rusted bars, old restraints bolted to walls, disintegrating mattresses that reeked of human misery. In one corner sat a long unused generator, its purpose unclear but ominous. "This has been here for decades," Walter said, running his hand along a wall worn smooth by countless hands. At the far end of the main corridor, they found a heavy door secured with new chains and a modern padlock, a stark contrast to the aged surroundings. "Someone's in there," Herrera said, pressing his ear to the door. "I hear movement." They cut through the chains and pulled the door open. The smell hit them first: unwashed bodies, human waste, despair. Then their lights found them. 2 women, gaunt and filthy, shielding their eyes from the sudden brightness. One of the women saw Walter's badge and began to weep, reaching out with trembling hands. "Please," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "Are you real? Are you really here?" "We're here," Walter said gently, helping her to her feet. "You're safe now. What are your names?" "Mary," the first woman said. "Mary Two Rivers." She gestured to her companion. "This is Adeline Runningbird." Walter studied them in the dim light. They appeared to be in their 50s, though malnutrition and suffering made it hard to tell. A terrible suspicion formed in his mind. "By any chance, are you related to the 1930 missing class?" he asked carefully. Both women nodded, fresh tears streaming down their faces. "We're the only survivors," Adeline said, her voice stronger than Mary's. "Everyone else is gone now. All our classmates, all our friends, gone." "We'll talk more once we get you above ground," Walter said, his throat tight with emotion. "Can you walk?" The women looked at the stairs leading up to freedom, their eyes filling with a desperate hope. "We'll crawl if we have to," Mary said fiercely. Walter and Herrera supported them, one on each side, as they began the slow climb. The women's legs shook with every step, muscles atrophied from years of confinement, but their determination was awe-inspiring. They gripped the metal railings with white knuckles, pulling themselves up through sheer force of will. "Almost there," Walter encouraged as they neared the top. "Just a few more steps." When they finally emerged into the warehouse, both women collapsed, sobbing as they felt fresh air on their faces for the first time in years. The sight of them, 2 elderly Indigenous women who had survived decades of captivity, brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened officers. Walter looked around at the scene: rescued children being tended by medics from the nearest town, arrested men in handcuffs, and now these 2 survivors from a case everyone had forgotten. Justice, long delayed, was finally being served. The pre-dawn air was cool against their faces as they emerged from the warehouse. The scene outside was one of controlled chaos: police cruisers with flashing lights, ambulances arriving from the nearby town, and the warehouse workers being loaded into vehicles, their hands cuffed behind their backs. Walter and Herrera guided Mary Two Rivers and Adeline Runningbird to a quiet spot near one of the ambulances, away from the commotion. The women sat on the ambulance's rear step, wrapped in thermal blankets, their eyes still adjusting to the open space after years of confinement. "Can you tell us what happened?" Walter asked gently, crouching to be at eye level with them. "That day in 1930? Mary clutched the blanket tighter, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was supposed to be a school field trip. They told us we were going to see the state capitol. We were so excited. Most of us had never been farther than the edge of town." Adeline picked up the story, her eyes distant with memory. "But instead of a bus, they loaded us onto S.H. Stiles' moving trucks. We thought it was strange, but the teachers said it was fine. Then they brought us here." "They shipped most of the girls out by rail in the first few months," Mary continued, her voice growing stronger. "The boys, too. We never saw them again. Some of us were kept here for entertainment." She spat the last word like poison. "But we learned how to survive, played along, faked madness when it suited them, stayed useful, cooking, cleaning. That's how we stayed alive." "We tried to escape once," Adeline added, bitterness creeping into her tone. "In 1935, made it as far as town, but their captors had the sheriff and mayor under their thumb back then. No one would believe us. They brought us right back." She looked at Walter with wonder. "Until now." Then Walter remembered what he'd read in the case report earlier. 2 victims had been found, but their status was located. "Did you know anything about the S.H. Stiles Moving Company?" Herrera asked. "What they were really doing?" The women exchanged glances. Mary spoke first. "We heard things over the years. Guards talking when they thought we were asleep or too broken to understand. They trafficked people, used the conflict in racial politics for their financial gains. Indigenous children were easy targets. No one cared when we disappeared." "How's the world now?" Adeline asked suddenly, hope and fear warring in her expression. "Has it changed? Are our people safe?" Walter and Herrera looked at each other, neither wanting to crush the fragile hope in the women's eyes. "It's not much better than back then," Walter admitted honestly. "But the boarding schools are getting closed down now. That's something, though the discrimination, it's still thick." "I'm certain the S.H. Stiles used their moving business as a front for trafficking," Walter continued, his jaw tightening. "Operating in league with corrupt officials for decades." "That couldn't be any more true," Mary said with conviction. "The town mayor was in on it, always has been." She paused. "Who's the mayor now?" "Mayor Douglas R. Krantz," Walter replied, grandson of Mayor Franklin W. Krantz. Both women's faces darkened. "Franklin," Adeline whispered. "He was in office back then. He knew. He had to have known." "Likely covered up the abduction for money and status," Walter said. "That's why you were never found. But after tonight, their crimes will be known. Will you testify against them?" "Yes," both women said in unison, their voices fierce despite their frailty. "The sheriff's department will support you," Herrera promised. "We have enough evidence now. With your testimony, we can launch full-scale investigations. Decades of silence and corruption will be unraveled." He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Herrera. We need teams to obtain warrants immediately. Targets are Simon H. Stiles, Jr., Mayor Douglas R. Krantz, and any associates of S.H. Stiles Moving Company. Charges include kidnapping, human trafficking, false imprisonment, and conspiracy." "Copy that, Deputy," came the response. "Teams are mobilizing." Walter looked at the rescued children being examined by medical personnel, their small forms wrapped in blankets. "Hopefully this case will help open people's eyes to just how much suffering and evil has surrounded these children, just because they weren't born white Americans." Mary reached out and grasped his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "It's much improvement to see white officers like all of you here rescuing us. We believed we would never see the world up here again, that we would die and rot down there." Tears streamed down her weathered face. "But you gave us new life." Herrera patted Walter's shoulder. "You deserve the credit, Walt. You were the one who kept reading and studying their case since this morning." The women looked at Walter with surprise. "You did?" Adeline asked. "You remembered us?" "Yes," Walter said, his voice thick. "I was deeply troubled by a recent case, 2 Indigenous girls murdered. It led me to your case file, but honestly, it was mostly God who led me here." "God and courage," Mary corrected softly. A medical team approached. "We need to examine them properly," the lead medic said. "But I can tell you most of the children aren't seriously injured. Malnourished, traumatized, but physically they'll recover." As the women were helped into the ambulance, Walter spotted a familiar figure among the rescued children. The boy who had trusted him, who had led him here. He was sitting on the ground, a medic checking the bump on his head. Walter approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. The boy looked up and, despite everything, managed a small smile. "Thank you," Walter said simply. "You were very brave. What's your name?" The boy straightened with pride. "Ashki Nez," he said, then added in English, "means boy tall. My grandfather's name." "Well, Ashki," Walter said, "you saved all these children. You're a hero." The boy shook his head. "I just wanted to save my friend, Thomas Bigay. We escaped together from this place. It's a long story how we made it back to town, but when we got there, we saw a man try to hurt 2 young Indigenous girls. I ran, but Thomas, he didn't. He tried to stop him. The men killed the girls, and then they shoved the knife to Thomas's hand." Walter immediately began jotting everything down, realizing the boy's testimony connected directly to the homicide case they were working on that day. Ashki continued, "Thomas, he tried to save those girls. He touched them, tried to stop the bleeding. But then the police showed up." "Thanks for sharing all this with me, Ashki. We'll discuss more at the station, all right? Thomas is being held there, and he'll need your help as a witness to tell his story to the people and to the judge." Walter looked around at all the Indigenous children being cared for and felt something shift inside him. His resolve to fight racial prejudice, already strong, crystallized into something unbreakable. "We're going to help you all get back to your families," he told Ashki and the other children within earshot, "and we're going to make sure you're protected. This will never happen again." Herrera joined him, watching as the ambulances prepared to depart. "I've already called news reporters," he said. "They're on their way. We'll cover this story as raw as it is. Everyone will know what happened here." "Good," Walter said firmly. "People need to see." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sunrise begin to paint the eastern sky with pale colors. The warehouse behind them looked less menacing in the growing light, but Walter knew its shadows would haunt him forever. "It's going to be an endless fight," Herrera said quietly. "The discrimination, the hatred, it's not going away overnight." "I know," Walter replied. "But maybe this is a start. Maybe people will begin to see the goodness in these children, in all Indigenous people. They deserve life, just like everyone else." "They deserve more than life," Herrera corrected. "They deserve dignity, respect, the chance to thrive, not just survive." Walter nodded, watching as Ashki was helped into an ambulance, the boy turning to wave at him one last time. The weight of the night's events pressed down on him, but so did a fierce hope. Justice had been served tonight, but the work was far from over. "Come on," Herrera said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We've got arrests to make and a town to wake up." As they walked toward their vehicles, the first rays of true sunlight broke over the horizon, illuminating a world that would never be quite the same again.